All right, most folks are in, and might as well start a little bit early then. And so I'll open up. Are there any questions, thoughts, anything from last week, or anything else that anyone would like to bring forward? Okay. So at the top of your previous worksheet, cross out part 1, and there's just going to be one part of Sixth Commandment, which I've got a few notes that I'm going to give you that you can add to your page, but we'll be moving on to Seventh Commandment. If you didn't grab a sheet, grab one. Yes.
Populous Zion, is it out of Zion? Is that what the Latin is, or what's the populous? Oh, okay. So
People of Zion, populous.
There is.
Wanted it to be more.
I talked to Pastor about this a little bit ago. I'm not really sure why it changed to populous, like why that's the liturgical name.
Yeah.
I tried doing some research on that kind of thing. But yeah, it's
Interesting.
daughter of Zion, people of Zion.
Okay.
I think in the context it's synonymous. You know, the daughter of Zion can be referred to as the people of Zion, right? The church. Although it can get a little weird because we know that the language of the church is bride, not necessarily daughter per se, but I think it can be synonymous in thought, but yeah, there's not a clear reasoning why they did what they did as far as that goes. All right. So just a couple of notes. One thing I didn't note or didn't put on the sheet about the Sixth Commandment that I thought is good to highlight. Luther brings this out in his conversation in the Large Catechism, starting at paragraph 200. But a good way to look at Commandments 6, 7, and 8, they come out of the Fifth Commandment. So we've established who we are and from where we come and how God continues to have authority over us in the Fourth Commandment. Then in the Fifth Commandment, we are commanded not to murder. And then the Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Commandments gives us a vision of what that not murdering looks like. And it starts most intimately with the possessions closest to us, that our flesh, so the one flesh, the marriage. And then we go to the Seventh Commandment, which is possessions. And then the Eighth Commandment, which is your reputation. And you can murder someone by going after each of those things. So I think it's a good way that Luther laid out or had that thought of looking back to what's already been commanded of us to help us understand the commandments a little bit more. Thoughts or questions about that? All right. So let's move into the Seventh Commandment, as you have in your sheet there. Seventh Commandment is, shall not steal. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not take our neighbor's money or possessions or get them in any, but help him to improve and protect his possessions and income. So Luther defines stealing, as you see there, in paragraph 224 of the Large Catechism as it's nothing else than to get possession of another's property wrongfully. And we'll talk about different ways that happens at the end. I give a few definitions. There's more than just the 4, but those are kind of 4 main ways in which we do and can steal. So this commandment, as I've talked about before, is commandments 4 through 8 are all protecting something that God has given as a gift. And so this commandment is protecting God's gift of possessions. Or if you're 7th and 8th graders, stuff that's an acceptable answer as well. God is protecting his gift of stuff because the reality is everything we have is a gift from God. Absolutely everything we have. And then we are called to be stewards of it. So God created us to look after the earthly gifts that he has given to our neighbors for their life and well-being. So remember, we talked about this, and this is in light of how we're also viewing 6th, 7th, and 8th commandments as a way to not murder, in a sense. I appreciate the fact that the emphasis there is that we are looking first and foremost out for our neighbor. And yes, we look out after ourselves as well, but it's primarily being a good neighbor. So as I said, everything we have is a gift from God. Let's look at Luke chapter 19. Many of you know this story. This is the story of Zacchaeus, who was a wee little man he climbed up hey, I jumped. Hey, Zacchaeus, I jumped. So Zacchaeus, I like this story because there's no exact time where we see a change of heart, but it is the Lord speaking to him that does it. So chapter 19, he entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. So that right there tells you something about Zacchaeus. He was not liked by people, most likely, because most, if not all, tax collectors were crooks. And what I mean by that is they did the job they were supposed to do, but let's say Rome said, okay, every family should pay $5 a month. And then Rome obviously needs that $5. So the tax collector would go, but the tax collector might take 15 and give Rome 5, and then he's making a profit. That's why they are not liked, because people knew that, but there was nothing they could do. And obviously, if someone's taking from you, you don't like that very much. So he was seeking to see Jesus, to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and I have defrauded, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek to save the lost. So as I said, I like this story simply because one, it's the Bible, but two, there's no absolute moment when we see him being told that he's doing anything wrong. It's simply the presence of Jesus and Jesus speaking to him that works in his heart, and he's able to recognize that he has done something wrong. Perhaps he overhears the crowd grumbling and recognizes that they're talking about him, a sinner. But nonetheless, what does he do? Immediately he says, I will give to the poor, and anyone that I have stolen from, I will return not just what they've been given, but fourfold. So what change did Jesus bring about in Zacchaeus? Simple question, softball question. Yeah, it changed his heart, right? And how he looked at things, because as a tax collector, chief tax collector, likely his main focus has been on making more and being comfortable. But as we've talked about before, when it comes to possessions and living worldliness, Is there ever a time that you're actually content? I would contend no. Maybe for a moment, like you have that euphoria when you get something you've been really wanting and you get it and you've amassed it. But like anything in the world, that it's like a drug. Eventually, that's why addicts are so addicted, because the drug, the amount of drug that they're taking eventually stabilizes and they don't feel it. So they have to take more and more and more. Same way with if you live your life just focused on your possessions, you're never going to be completely content with what you have, because there's always going to be something else you want, or you feel that there's something better or more.
See something. I mean, we don't know the fate, but this kind of played out this week with the CEO of United Healthcare getting shot.
Sure.
This week. I mean, I seen a lot of posts online where, well, he had it coming because he made $10 million a year. Well, what does that have to do with being murdered? You know, but the jealousy,
Right.
the jealousy of our human nature.
Yeah, when you have a society that takes revenge and murder into their own hands, vengeance into their own hands, you have a troublesome society, which is original sin. The Lord says, vengeance is mine. Whether or not it's true, I think most of us can agree that in that case, as far as the CEO of a pharmaceutical entity being murdered, we wouldn't applaud that by any means, right? But we certainly are not blind to the fact that there is an issue in our culture, if not world, as far as how money is being made off of keeping people sick, right? That's a completely different discussion, maybe a completely other topic for a Bible study at some point in time. But there is, if you look at different information and look at different things, you look at even going all the way back to when the food pyramid was created. The food pyramid it wasn't even a person that knew anything about dietary needs that created it. The reading that I've done on it, it was a legislator who wanted to put some legislation into place and then created this food pyramid. And then if you know anything about the food pyramid, it's somewhat somewhat upside down as far as what's really good and healthy for you. But nonetheless, that's a rabbit trail that we could certainly go down. But yes, the greed or the animosity we have towards someone who has a ton. But I think it goes deeper than just, in that case, than just not having. It goes much deeper than that, obviously.
But if somebody's stealing millions of dollars, somebody goes and robs the bank.
Mm-hmm.
As humans, we look at that person like they're a lot worse than us. Let's see if that's a word. Worse than us. Than if we are
Perhaps.
If we're stealing a half hour from our employer because we're goofing around at work.
Sure.
We look at that stealing as, well, that's nothing. But
yeah,
$1 million, that's terrible.
Well, or even not even $1 million. If someone just stole a large amount or anything from anyone, yeah, we tend to do that. But then we also just sit back and we have no problem doing like pull tabs and stuff like that and not looking at how that's stealing. And we think that that's okay. And gambling, we're okay with that, because there we look at it as a sport, but we're actually stealing from other people that have been addicted to the game. Right. And then we'll hide behind it and say, well, but it's really good because the Lions and this entity, they do all of this and then they pump all that money back into the community, that's just yes, it's a good thing that they do. But let's be honest about it and have good, honest conversations. At the least, if you don't want to agree that it's stealing, trying to win money off of other people is breaking this commandment by being lazy and not using the gifts God has given you to provide for yourself and for your neighbors. So that opens up a much broader conversation as well of what we pull in and what we talk about as actual stealing and usury and all different terms that we can use when it comes to you shall not steal. Other thoughts or questions? All right, so the change that Jesus brings to Zacchaeus is his change of heart. He recognizes, and it could be, like I said, he could have heard from these people and been offended in a sense by, oh, this is how these people view me. I'm someone that's a sinner because I steal from them. But nonetheless, it's the presence of Jesus who is there, which is, you'll hear in the sermon today, if you haven't heard already, that's why it's important to be in the Word. Because as Jesus is regularly in our heart, through the Word, ingesting of the Word, it's going to change our conscience. It's going to change how we think about things and how we think of what we do and how we approach our daily life. So as Christians, we rejoice in and look after the earthly goods God has given us and our neighbors to support daily life, also known as daily bread. Now, we do live in a reality in the world that has temporal boundaries enforced by the laws of the land between what is mine, that should say, not mine, and yours. Okay, so there's very clearly, if I walk out into the parking lot, most of you have a vehicle that you brought here. I can't just go out to the parking lot every Sunday and decide which one is mine, because they're not. They're yours. In as much as I'd love to. I see some really nice cars out there, but I'd love to be able to say that's mine. Just like I can't walk into a store and take things without stopping and redeeming for them, right? Without paying for them. There is a mine and a yours reality. So if you look on your paper, I put a graphic there. I put an image of a picket fence, and I like this imagery for myself. If it helps you, I'll explain it to you. If you don't like it, just cross it out. Don't worry about it. But the top line is mine. The bottom line is yours. And mine and yours is divided by that picket fence. Now, I purposely put a picket fence there because one image you could put there is like a wall where you can't see through, you can't get through, something that is very protective and absolutely can't get through. And this particular fence you see looks like what perhaps you could have a gate there too. Now, the reason I like this imagery is because even though there's mine and there's yours, this fence allows me to do what? I can see through, so I can see if my neighbor is in need, but it also is not inhibitive or prohibitive of me being able to give or take if they want to give. So that's what I like about that imagery, because yes, there's boundary there, but it's not a boundary that defines an absolute, this is mine and no one else should have it. Any thoughts or questions about that? Does it make sense? Yes. Oh, good fences make good neighbors, right? And I mean, we do know, we have scripture, I don't have it off the top of my head, that talks about how you don't move property lines. That's a part of in the Old Testament law. So there is a reality to the sense that there are definition and defining realities to what belongs to someone and what doesn't. But what we have to remember is you go back to remembering that everything is a gift from God. And as such, he has given, one way I like to say it is everything that you have. So if you think about that right now, everything that you have is first and foremost God's equipping you to be able to serve others. And that's kind of backwards than how we tend to think about it as Americans and as sinners. Because we think about everything that we have for the sake of us. But this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, that God created us to look after the earthly gifts that he has given us, given to our neighbors for the life of well-being. So helping them keep what they have, but also serving them as needed. So underneath the fence, I say, however, those boundaries ought not to hinder our generosity, stewardship toward our neighbor. We are caretakers, stewards, and administrators of God's gracious gifts to his creation. So why are earthly possessions important? Well, they're the gifts which God provides for our own and our neighbors' needs and enjoyment of life. Psalm 104, you cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. And then Proverbs 14, whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. And let's look at 2 Corinthians 8, 1-7. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of their part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then, by the will of God, to us. Accordingly, we urge Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. An important verse in there is the second half of verse 7, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God to us. And what that's helping you remember is in order for you to be someone who is truly a good steward, your relationship with your Lord must be the first relationship that you pay attention to. Because it's out of that relationship that we have with our Lord that we are able to do the good works that he has planned for us. Yes.
Is it also apply to like time management or consistently late?
Yep. Yeah, actually, the next question is going to answer that. So you're just, yeah. Yeah, still, we're not just talking about, so the question was, is this talking just about like physical earthly things, or are we also talking about other things like perhaps time or even relationships? And yes, all of those things we can steal from. And so let's jump into that question. How do we fear and love God in keeping the seventh commandment? We fear and love God by not taking earthly gifts from our neighbor by. So when you could circle earthly gifts there, and perhaps make a note of various things. What are earthly gifts? Well, certainly earthly gifts involve all of the physical things you have, your clothing, your house. Just think of the meaning of the first article of the Creed and how the Lord continues to provide for you all things. But included in that also is your gift of time, your gift of relationships, your gift of talent, your ability to do things. So we fear and love God by not taking earthly gifts from our neighbor, by first stealing. So physically, yes, stealing. Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So this is talking about when they're mad because the woman wastes ointment upon Jesus, and he's like, well, that could have been given to us, and we could have sold it or used it for profit. And he's interested in that because As it says, he's the keeper of the money bags, and the more money in there, the more he can take out of it. B, being lazy or sloppy. Being lazy or sloppy. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. So a couple ways you can think of this one is, number one, if you're being lazy, you're stealing from God because he's given you skills and abilities to be able to serve him and people. But also, let's say you have a job, and as you are sitting at your desk, you spend 3 hours of your 8-hour shift searching YouTube or scrolling Facebook. You're stealing from your boss in that moment because they're paying you to do work and you're not working. So in that way, that's being, in a sense, lazy. Or if you're just nonchalant about what you do and you're really sloppy with your job, same type of thing. You are stealing essentially from the person that has entrusted you and is possibly paying you to do a particular job. Then C, dishonesty or fraud. Dishonesty or fraud. The wicked borrows but does not pay back, but the righteous is generous and gives. So, dishonesty by saying, hey, can I use this? Can I borrow this? Or even like putting forth, we've seen this happen before where someone will start a Caring Bridge site and they'll say that they're battling cancer when they don't have cancer, and they're doing it for the sake of getting gain, and they do get gain because people feel sorry for them. And then so dishonesty, that's essentially both dishonesty and fraud. You're using something as a lie to take advantage of others.
So how about buying something for somebody that you buy something for somebody that's $100, but you know it's worth $200? Now, some people call that a true business deal. Some people call that thievery. So,
I mean, if you go to a place knowing that you're going to purchase something, and that's the price tag that's on it. I mean, if you want to help them and go to them and say, do you realize what you're selling? And do you realize how much it's worth? That would be truly having an interest in the other person, right? But I would say on principle, you're not wrong for buying it because that's the price they had on it. And that's why you like to shop at Walmart.
some people.
So you get everything cheaper.
Stop, it's kind of like gambling too, so because you're gambling.
Yeah, although Vicar and I have chatted about this, investment is a little bit different than gambling. I say you have to be careful. I do believe there is wisdom in investing, but I also would contend that if investing begins to overtake your mind and you're doing it for the sake of being comfortable, I would question that if that begins to overtake your mind. Because if you're doing everything you can do to be comfortable, then who aren't you relying on? The Lord. And I mean, I think there's other things to talk about there too, because how many times do you see people that work so hard at setting up their quote unquote retirement only to get to that point in their life and then they're never able to enjoy it? Because either they die right away or all kinds of health things hit them because they've stopped doing what they're doing and the body adjusts to this new lifestyle, and now all of a sudden they can't do much. Which, I mean, maybe it's not wise of me to say, but the thing that I say is live your life now. If there's something you want to do and you're looking forward to do, why wait 20 years down the road when you're going to be older and can't do much as good as you could now? But there's other types of investing too, because think of like LCEF, for instance, right? That's the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, where you can invest in that. And those monies that are invested in that then are helping other churches that are in need of loans or something like that. But then you also get back to the principle of loans and all of that is, are we supporting something that helps people get into debt? And is that the best? Or, so it's an interesting conversation to have when you're thinking along those lines. Other thoughts, questions? Vicar, you got anything? Liar.
The parable of the people who are given the money, and I'm paraphrasing here, but then the one guy just buries his money and doesn't do anything with it.
Yep.
So can you explain that to me a little bit then maybe? Because like the guy who didn't do anything with his money is the guy who got.
Yeah, so he didn't act faithfully with what he had. In the sense of not wanting to do anything at all. I think we have to be careful with that. We hear that parable and we do think actual investing, and I don't believe that's what's actually being taught there. Right? So if we're talking about the faith that God has given us, the word, and we're going to be people who, this is talking about the parable of the talents. Is it the talents? Yeah. Well, it was given to them for the sake of being a steward of it. And the definition coming out of that of a good steward is using it for the sake of, think of it through the lenses of what we're talking about here, for the sake of loving God and loving others. And to simply take it and say, well, I don't want to do anything about it because I'm actually scared that I'm going to do it wrong or something like that, is being somewhat irresponsible with it. Right. Whereas to invest, in a sense, your time, talent, and treasure is to serve the Lord, serve others. Goes back to what? Well, right, yeah. I mean, the being lazy and sloppy is not utilizing what God has given you. But there again, I would say that is almost like that mindset of, well, I'm going to put this away because I'm not sure and I want to feel safe about it. I think a good comparison to this would be, think of Joseph, right? What is Joseph, when he interprets the dream of Pharaoh, there's a recognition that there's going to be what? A famine for a very long time. And what does Joseph encourage them to do? Build some barns, to put some things away for the sake of being able to not have a mass for themselves, but for the sake of being able to serve the neighbor. Whereas you have the opposite side, the man who is amassing so much that he builds new barns to be able to put all of his stuff in, only to have the Lord come to him and say, you fool. You're dead tonight. Now what?
And because Joseph would be wise to steward with 10 talents at best, using those gifts that he's given and providing for those.
He is, right.
Gifts are given.
Yeah. Right. Joseph is being an example there. Now, some could take that, the rest of the story of Joseph and how everything eventually, some people might take it as a story of bad government, big government, because what eventually happens is everything ends up being sold to the government, essentially, because of the famine and their need to, and then the government is providing for them.
I don't like the silver cup in Benjamin's bag. That always makes me uncomfortable because that's deceitful. That's
Sure.
That's fraud. He's saying you stole my cup and he didn't. I mean, it was, to me, like, did the end justify the means? Like, he's allowed to sin like that because he's morally superior to all the other brothers, and so he just gets his, I don't know, I picked up a weird.
Okay, so yeah, so talking more about Joseph, and Joseph puts the silver cup in, or puts the cup in the bag, for the sake of testing. We may not like it because it looks bad. It looks like he's, frauding his brothers. But in this particular case, he is testing to see if they have changed their hearts.
We brought people that were just testing.
Yep.
Oh.
You can break commandments if you are doing it for the sake of testing people. No. You have to remember sometimes there are things, it's just like, then that also means that almost every man should have more than one wife. And there's a lot of things that happen in scripture for the sake of teaching, and they are not prescriptive on how you should behave. They are descriptive of how sin plays itself out.
So we look at that and say, we recognize Joseph wasn't perfect either, like that may not have been. The
Sure. It may not have been, but at the same time, that's also being shrewd, that's being wise, he wants to truly see if these men is he being mean, or is he looking out for his younger brother, because he wants to make sure that these men who threatened to put him to death, and for all they believe, he is dead, and he wants. Don't think of it as a woman. I mean, they were all probably a little freaked out. I mean, they didn't want to bring him to begin with, because there were, I mean, had Joseph been able to see the conversation that they had with their dad, then he would have seen right away that their hearts had changed, because they knew that Joseph, he had already lost Joseph, and they didn't want him to lose another son. But then they remembered that he said, "Do not come back without him." And then the dad, okay, take him. So you can't get hung up on some of the bad things that happen, because then you're also going to get hung up on Jacob and Esau, and how mom encouraged one to lie. But we recognize that through these matters of deception, the Lord is working. And sometimes those matters of deception happen because there's a recognition that the other person is so frivolous with what they have that it's a matter of example. All right, so just to clarify down at the bottom, or review those. So A is stealing, B, lazy or sloppy, C, dishonesty and fraud. So we fear and love God by looking after our neighbor's well-being, by helping to perfect and improve their earthly possessions, income, and livelihood. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. Exodus 23, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you kill it. No, you refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. Look at Large Catechism, paragraph 233. Large Catechism, paragraph 233. Therefore, let everyone know his duty, at the risk of God's displeasure. He must do no harm to his neighbor, nor deprive him of profit, nor commit any act of unfaithfulness or hatred in any bargain or trade. But he must also faithfully preserve his property for him, secure and promote his advantage. This is especially true when one accepts money, wages, and one's livelihood for such service. So Luther there summarizing what we have been talking about.
Says, for we must not preach this to Christians, but chiefly to hood girls. Like Christians don't do this.
Well, I mean, he's not saying that Christians don't do it, but certainly the people that need to hear it are the ones who are dying. So how does God provide us and others with our earthly goods? He provides for us through the bounty of the earth. Creation gives us all that we need. Psalm 65 there. You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, for so you have prepared it. Which is why we are to be good stewards of the earth. B, the vocation of parents, family, neighbors. Hebrews 11, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. In Proverbs 1, hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. So parents are in our lives for the sake of being able to provide for us. And then C gets to you personally, jobs and careers. God has given you the ability to do things. 2 Thessalonians, for even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. And then Ephesians 4:28, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. And so we are to be good stewards of God's created gifts, so that our family is provided with daily bread. God has given you all these gifts, so it is our responsibility to be good stewards over it, so that our family be provided with daily bread. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever, 1 Timothy says. Others benefit from the work that you do, especially the poor, but they benefit from your grateful and charitable use of what God has given you. The church has the resources it needs for ministry. 1 Corinthians 9:14, in the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. Galatians 6:6, let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. And then all creation prospers. So again, it gets back to, as A in the previous one talked about, the bounty of the earth. We are good stewards. That's where conservation, for instance, is a good thing. And because of sin, sometimes we need laws to keep us good stewards. I think probably one of the greatest examples we have of bad stewardship of the earth is when white men came into this country and slaughtered all of the bison just for sport, to where you had mountains of bison just laying around, going waste. Yes.
Running into the trains.
Say that again.
In order to get the trains to go through, or not, you're railing every time on a buffalo herd.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, there's that case for some in the sense that, I mean, I know one of Molly's classes were just talking about this, about how the language of how they were talking about like deer hitting or people driving and hitting deer, and just talking about how, you know, we talk about it from the standpoint of how it was the deer's fault, but the reality, but the reality is as we have expanded our lifestyle, we've created means that put those dangers in front of us. So, but there is a way to be able to be safe about it and be good about it. I don't know that they always work. I think I saw in some places now they've created overpasses for animals where they'll have like fences and whatnot to, if they need to. The overpasses like that. Sure. Yeah. But I mean, there's a difference between good conservation and management versus just outright killing for the sake of killing.
Plus, it just proves to you how fast we want to get stuff, right? I mean.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because the train has to go faster so we can
Yep.
get our stuff quicker, so.
Yeah. Speed is what we like. And I suppose, I mean, that could be a sidebar conversation in even with this commandment. We want everything so quickly and so, yeah, immediate, and I don't know. It's scary to see how quickly we are getting dumber. And what I mean by that, especially now with the onslaught of like artificial intelligence and the use of that and the amount of things that come out. I mean, Vicar and I were just talking about this the other day, and you can put in a sentence about something. What was the example you used? You were saying that you put in you write a hymn, I think, or write a hymn, a baptismal hymn using Lutheran theology, and like in a matter of seconds, boom, you have something, and it's not horrible. And you even have pastors who are doing this for sermons, who they'll put in a text and they'll say, write a sermon based on this text and you put in a few key words. And I've seen examples of them where it's like, that's not a bad sermon. It's better than some I've heard, but it may not be as in depth, and it certainly isn't personable because it doesn't know the people per se. But it's very scary to think about how we have relinquished our minds and our gift of intelligence and our gift of work to many things. I was just reading, I saw now that AI has been able to predict weather patterns better than any other computer models that are being used by weathermen. And I just thought to myself, well, there's another job that's going to go by the wayside, essentially. And if you just start thinking about how many personal jobs go away, and some are just like, okay, great. I don't have to do that, or I don't have to do this. So there's, just like with anything, I think there's a balance. There's some really good things. As Vicar and I were talking, AI is used to help translate things because we have tons of really good theology books that are still in German or still in other languages that need to be brought out and into the English language. It would be wonderful if we could all just learn German and read them, but that's just not going to happen. And so there are some really good tools in that way where someone can take that, it can be translated, and then it still requires someone who knows what they're doing to look what's been done. But as Vicar was telling me that the system that's being used for that has grown exponentially, and it's its own education process of what the languages are. But there are some scary parts to it, because Vicar was reading about how there's a particular AI function that the people who developed it are admitting that their AI computer is doing things that they never told it to do.
AI is.
I think what AI is where this is where we have to be careful. I think AI is a major door for the devil. And I think you see a lot of cases where the devil is able to do a lot of work through it, because we simply just hand it over and say, here you go. And then, oh yeah, right. Right. Vicar offended me the other day. He said, anybody over 40 can't look at old pictures anymore and decipher whether or not they're real or not. I almost did it while we were driving down the road. But
You usually bring us back to like sin was the same thousands of years ago that it is now.
Yep.
My thought when you're talking about this goes back to the Israelites in the desert when God's giving them manna.
Mhm.
And the only instruction they had was they were to only collect what they could use for today, and on the sixth day collect what they needed for this. And how many of those tried to cheat that system?
Sure. Only to wake up, and what was it? It had turned into worms and stank. It was rotten. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of directions to go. This is obviously a sidebar, but there's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to the seventh commandment. But there are, as we believe that technology is making us smarter, I think it pits us against this commandment in a lot of ways that we haven't even thought about thinking about. That we're just handing over responsibilities that we should have. Now, that being said, there is a balance. And like I said, there can be some good out of some of these things, but we have to be very careful, and at least at the least, be willing to have some good, honest conversation about it and help us see, okay, am I really using this for good, or am I doing this because I don't want to do the hard work? Right?
Is it as simple as we don't pray enough about what we do with God's gifts, our money? And
I think that's always going to be the case, right? Go back to what we talked about at the beginning. If your relationship with the Lord is not your it's not your primary focus each and every day, then everything you do is going to be for who? You. And so all of your decisions are going to be made based on what makes you feel well. And so when it comes to stewardship, I mean, the way that plays itself out is, well, obviously I'm going to, when you are first, in most realities, giving to the church, for instance, as far as stewardship goes, comes last. I'm going to pay my bills. I'm going to make sure I have this and this and this and this and this. And then with whatever's left over. And kind of that's what gets to the heart of Cain and Abel. One offering was accepted because it was first fruits. The other one, as we recognize, there was a heart issue, and likely the heart issue was, I'm just going to gather a little bit from here and I'm going to give it to the Lord. It wasn't a first fruits mentality. Paragraph 247 of the Large Catechism. Beware of this. The poor man will come to you. There are so many now. He must buy things with the penny of his daily wages and live upon it. When you're harsh to him, as though everyone lived by your favor, and you skin and scrape him to the bone, and when you turn him away with pride and arrogance, to whom you ought to give things without payment, he will go away wretched and sorrowful. Since he can complain to no one else, he will cry and call to heaven. Then beware, I say again, as of the devil himself, for such groaning and calling will be no joke. It will have a weight that will prove too heavy for you and all the world, for it will reach him who takes care of the poor, sorrowful hearts. He will not allow them to go unavenged. But if you despise this and become defiant, See the one you have brought upon you. If you succeed and prosper, before all the world, you may call God and me a liar. So Luther is there saying, to summarize that, be very careful if you're not going to be generous. Because the one who asks, and if they are truly poor, they have the only person they can call out to is God. And when it's time for you to give an account, that will be something that is accounted. So then there's just some definitions or examples of stealing. You have robbery, theft, usury, fraud. Robbery is stealing by force. Theft is stealing by stealth. Usury is stealing by overcharging, paying wages too low. And fraud is false advertisement or sales. Like your vehicle that you're trying to sell has a very bad issue and you make it look all pretty and you don't tell them about it. Huh? Use AI to doctor the picture. Right. All right. Any thoughts, questions, comments about seventh commandment? All right, like always, if you do have one and you don't want to ask it out loud, send it to me and I will answer it. And if I think it's worthy of more people hearing about it, I'll make sure that we'll talk about it in our class time. All right, let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a blessed day.